Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Marilyn Shannon, and I am so happy to have you here today. I'm happy I'm here today, actually, because today's show is going to be so exciting. So, welcome. It's good to have you. We're going to get on with the show. I want to say hi to Amnon before we get started because I know today with this worm thing that's going on in computers, I wanted Amnon, who is a computer like guru, to just kind of give us a little talk about it. Go
How
ahead.
are you doing
I'm
today?
good, 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 good. And happy Mother's Day to all the parents out there.
Yep.
Go ahead. Or people, everybody that parents. Go ahead.
So this thing, I mean, a lot of people are panicking.
Right.
The people that have a reason to panic are the people that did not do updates, did not allow updates to happen on their Windows machines.
Okay.
A lot of people are resisting
Doing the updates.
doing the updates.
So you're telling everybody they should do
that
updates.
well, yeah, that started with Windows 10
Okay.
before Windows 10 was uh, actually rolled over.
Okay.
That Microsoft was trying to push you into it, and a lot of people didn't want it.
Okay.
So they stopped the updates, the automatic updates. But if you didn't do your updates last month in March, then you are very vulnerable. I mean,
Okay.
you are vulnerable to this.
So what do people do about it?
So today, I mean, it's kind of late, not late. You need to update your Windows, whether it's 7
Okay.
or 8 or 10, to the latest updates. And there is nothing wrong with doing it. Microsoft took it so seriously that, I mean, they don't support Windows XP, Windows Vista,
Anymore.
Windows 8, not anymore.
Right.
But they came up with patches even for these operating system because they know that a lot of people are still using these operating
So
systems.
don't open up anything that you shouldn't
Don't-
open up.
You can open, but make sure that if you are opening, the only way to get infected is if you open an attachment and allow and follow what it tells you to do. Not many people these days would do it. Now, in a big company, it's enough that one person does it and the worm starts going through the network. At home, hopefully you're smart enough to know, okay, I don't know who that person is, and I am not going to open this attachment.
Okay.
So unless you are, if you are doing your Windows updates on regular basis, you let it do it, then you got nothing to worry about.
So you have to be really smart.
Antivirus doesn't help
Okay.
because this is part of the fabric of Windows. So antivirus doesn't realize that this is something bad. This was a flaw in Windows, and they took advantage of it, and
Somebody took
Microsoft
advantage. Okay.
fixed it.
All right. Thank you.
That's it.
All right. Yay. So
Have a
good
good
to
one.
have a resident scholar on our team right here. All right. Well, anyway, tune into his shows on Sunday because he gives all these kinds of updates and stuff like that. So here we go. So we have two guests on today. Anita Foeman, who's a PhD, is the founder and primary investigator of the DNA Discussion Project. Dr. Foeman holds the rank of professor in the Department of Communication Studies. Dr. Foeman is a scholar of intercultural and organizational communication. She holds a BA from Defiance College, which I'd have to say on some level she is a little defiant because she's going in the right direction. That's a cool thing. And an MA and PhD from Temple University. Dr. Foeman joined the faculty of Westchester University in 1982. The DNA Discussion Project is integrated into the courses she teaches in intercultural communication. And then our next guest is Bessie Lawton, PhD. And Dr. Lawton is the co-investigator of the DNA Discussion Project. Dr. Lawton received her PhD in communication from the Annenberg School for Communication at the University of Pennsylvania. She received her BA and MA in communications from the University of the Philippines. She is an associate professor of communication studies at Westchester, University of Pennsylvania. Her research interests include intercultural communication, identity issues, communication and power, and communication pedagogy. Okay, now we're going to get on with this conversation, which is about the stories that our DNA has in store for us and can teach us and tell us and share with us. So let me welcome our guests today, Bessie and Anita. Yay!
Thanks for having us.
Pleasure to be here.
Oh, it's so nice to have you. I've been waiting for the show for a long time because I love anything that is about us connecting.
Absolutely.
So why don't you start us off, Bessie or Anita? Which one? Anita, you want to start us?
You want me to talk
Yeah.
about how the project started?
Yeah, go right ahead.
It started about 11 years ago. I have done diversity training for the last 30 years or so. And so I had just in a parallel way been interested in the Human Genome Project. And when I first started to read that you could use the information from the Human Genome Project to learn about our ancestry, I thought that was really interesting. And I wondered, related to my diversity work, how many people are walking around with a story about what their ancestry is that really is not the case. So I got three kits. I wrote a grant and I got three kits. They were $450 a piece at the time to test somebody who identified as Black, somebody who identified as white, and somebody who identified as biracial Black-white. And as you would guess, they had all kinds of things in their background. And so immediately you start to understand that people's DNA tell a lot of stories that our narratives do not.
And that must be extraordinarily freeing when you think
Well,
you're one
I
way.
think it's challenging as well. And so I had been looking at the stories over several years, and then Dr. Lawton and I have been working together, and Bessie had been helping me do some of the quantitative analysis, and she said, well, why don't we do some quantitative analysis on what you're doing? And then we started our collaboration, and we've been doing great work with that since then.
Yeah,
This
I
is
came in
fascinating.
probably 5 or 6 years ago, and at that point, the price of the kit started becoming more reasonable. So we were able to get a bigger sample compared to $450 10 years ago, when she could only get 3 or 4 at a time. So we've been able to amass quite a pretty big sample of data of people who have taken the test.
And so what is this data telling us?
Why don't you
Do you
talk
want to
about
look quantitative first?
Yeah,
or
go
still-
ahead. Yeah.
Well, several things, right? We tried to look for patterns between different groups of people. And one of the things we found that was most striking was the difference in how males versus females respond to the information. So maybe I should back up a little bit. Part of our protocol involves asking people to answer a pre-survey, which asks them questions such as, how do they identify, with whom have they shared the information, how do they expect people to react, are there some gaps in their family narratives, and then we have them, we pull their sample, send it off to the lab, and after we receive their results, we have them do a post-survey asking essentially the same questions based on the results that they found. And one of the patterns we found was that females tend to be more likely to be fluid in how they identify from pre to post. And they were also more likely to say that, given this information, well, I'm going to change my identification or do more research about what I see. A biggest percentage of the males would say they would just do nothing with the information.
And it was shocking to me that people would get new DNA information and say, I'm not changing my story. So somebody would have a story, I'm 100% Italian. And then they get some information that showed that, nah, you're really 56%. And they say, no, I'm still going to call myself 100% Italian. And so you realize that the science is just one piece of it, but it's a new piece, and it starts to challenge what how we've categorized ourselves in these separate little buckets.
Right. It's challenging us emotionally.
Yes, and in fact, one of the questions we ask is, how do you think people would react, and how do you react before and after? And most people at the beginning would say, I'm very excited, it's all positive, but then some of them get the results and the numbers change significantly. The biggest reaction is now surprise, and we have a very big percentage that says they are skeptical and upset about the information.
Yeah, and we were chatting earlier that there was somebody who for years was identifying herself as biracial, white, and Asian, and people had said to her, you're not part African American, and she was no, 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 and had spent a lot of energy really pushing back against that narrative. Well, she found out that she did have quite a bit of African in her background, and it was impacting how other people saw her, other people treated her. So that was a huge insight for her about how people use narratives to try to change how other people treat them.
So, and you mentioned to me that there's only 0.1% difference between us all, and we're more alike. We're 99% alike. So, can you like kind of dissect that a little bit?
You want to?
One of the numbers that you hear a lot in media in terms of DNA is that humans are 99.9% the same in their DNA. So the difference, what makes us different from each other, is really just 0.1%. And yet we spend a lot of our time in society, in politics, trying to focus on that 0.1% difference. And that's particularly why we're interested in this study, to start talking about what makes us the same, because we are 99.9% the same.
So we obsess on that 0.1%, and we're wrong about that. So, go imagine.
Yeah, really. Okay, so we're going to talk a lot about what makes us alike. But can you, before we get on with it, just in case, can you give us just a little bit, break down what DNA means?
Well, you get half of your background from your mom, half from your dad, and those messages are carried across in DNA. That's the software the soft and hardware that explains what color your hair is going to be, what color your eyes are going to be. And the interesting thing is that since you get half from your mom and half from your dad, you and your siblings might be slightly different because it's not necessarily the same half. And so, that provides a great deal of variation from one generation to the next. So DNA is the message that, that says, here's what we're going to look like. Here's that physical, what our physical bodies are going to be.
Yeah, we get a lot of people who say, I've done it, so my sibling doesn't have to do the test, or my sibling has done it, so I don't have to do the test, assuming that because they come from the same parents that they would have exactly the same DNA. But really, that's not the case. There are iterations that happen over thousands of years where people get certain genes from the mom, certain genes from the dad, and over time, over 3 or 4 generations, they may have very, very different genes in the same generation.
And one of the siblings that we want to test, they were young at the time that I first met them, but a set of twins, it's a boy and a girl. She's tall and blonde and he's short and dark. So I'm so sure that they have inherited different things, even though they were born at the same time.
That's really interesting, because I am I'll have to talk to you about this. Because
you mentioned that.
Yeah, because I just launched my first book, and now my second one is about twins, and it's fascinating because I was gonna look at them in terms of like just how they are, because some of them are soulmates, some of them are what they might call twin flames, and some of them seem to be karmic. But there's something else, and I didn't want to look at it, genetics, because I'm not a scientist.
Sure.
I was looking at it like how they get along. And it's
Sure.
fascinating now that you're bringing this up, because that adds a whole nother kind of level to this.
Well, that's interesting that you had mentioned that, because we had just decided a couple weeks ago that our next subsample would be twins. We wanted to look at twins. Yes, because we've looked at specific subsamples. The last one we did was interracial, people who identify as multiracial. And we got some interesting results from that too, namely that the younger people who are multiracial are more fluid in how they identify. And so we thought, well, what about, let's do some twins. Let's see whether they actually identify differently and how they feel about their profiles.
Yeah. So that would be very interesting, because with what I found, and it was very interesting, they don't all get along.
Well, just not to get too far afield, but years ago, I had identical twins. There were identical twins on campus, but they'd been adopted separately. And the one guy kept running into people who said, are you Bill? And they finally met each other. He said, I didn't like him that much.
Yeah, it would be interesting.
but in terms of the DNA, we had two sets of sisters. They weren't twins, but two sets of sisters, and they identified differently racially. One set of sisters was Korean and Black, and one identified as African American, the other identified as Korean, and another set who are Latina. One identifies as Afro-Latina, and the other identifies as more Euro-Latina. So you can have people in the same family, and the interesting thing is when we tested the two who were Korean and Black, their profiles were almost identical, but they still saw the world very differently and experienced the world differently.
So you know what, and I've listened to some of your videos, and I highly suggest. I've been posting them on YouTube. Excuse me, I posted them on Facebook, and I've been posting them on Twitter today and
Thanks for
yesterday.
sharing.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I highly recommend, all of you out there, go and listen, because we might cover some different things, and I'm using some of those, some of the bits and pieces that I got from there. But this is fascinating, and I know it's a big conversation. So there's a lot to share. And I want to also say that if anybody would like to call in now, anytime during the show, you can at 919-518-9773. And if you don't have a phone and you want to come in on Skype voice, you're welcome to. And that's computers, plural, the number 2K voice, computers 2K voice. And then you can join us in the chat and ask questions and so forth. And there is a question in here, and I don't know this word, so I'm going to leave it. It says, what is a haplogroup?
Haplogroup.
Yes.
Haplogroup. Yeah. What we use is slightly different than people do the haplogroups, because they're looking either at your mother's ancestry line, the mitochondrial DNA, or your father's, where you're looking at the Y. And so they can identify what specific group of people you're genetically associated with. We use something called autosomal, which looks at the totality of your background. It's a little less precise, but it's getting more and more precise all the time. So I don't say it that as quickly today. But what we do gives you a broader profile of your background than the haplogroups. That tells you on one side, like if you go from mother to mother to mother to mother, like where that sort of goes back to. So it's just different kinds of tests, but the haplogroup test is a little bit different than what we do. Ours is broader.
And so how much of the results are influenced by how somebody feels, or like a quantum kind of thing?
If you think about how people identify, right, you would think, and here we are talking about science, and you think, well, this is what science says. It's hard science. Therefore, this is what should be most important because it is correct. That's the impression people would get. But if you talk to people, you find that people do not always consider that to be the primary factor in terms of how they identify. I would say the biggest or the strongest influence in how people identify would be their family narratives, followed by their own cultural experience, how they've lived their life. And then another piece of information that you add in is the DNA profile. And then they start using that as a jump off point to explore what else makes them who they are.
Yeah, because remember, this is new information. This didn't even exist for, all practical purposes 15 years ago. And so this is something that somebody has to figure out how to integrate into their total story. And so now you get people like Rachel Dolezal, who says, I'm genetically one thing, but culturally, I'm something else. So it's bringing about a whole conversation about what it means to be authentically Black, white, Jewish, Italian, and it's a much different conversation.
So does the DNA change based on how you feel, or it is what it is?
Oh no, the DNA doesn't change.
That doesn't change. That is what it is.
How you feel might be changed by the DNA information that you get.
Right.
Although there are quite a few people who say, like the gender difference, I'm not changing anything. One other question we had asked people, because we wanted to find out if there are practical implications on identification, is we asked them how they would identify on the census. Because we all know census information is used for resource allocation, to make decisions on transportation, education, and all other things in society. So we wanted to find out whether people would change how they would identify the census. And we found that those who identify as Europeans, about a quarter of them said they would add to their identification. But those who identify primarily as non-European, about 2/3 of them said they would change their census identification.
Interesting. So you mentioned, how men and women view this information differently. So what other kinds of information are you gathering at this point?
Well, the generational stuff is also interesting because when we did the DNA project with people who identified as biracial, it was much more likely that they would pick one or the other, so that somebody might even have mostly European background, but that person identifies themselves culturally as Black, for example. So, but the younger generation is much more comfortable with being multiracial, and you find on the census that more and more people are identifying as multiracial. And we did a couple of very young people in this research project, and they said, I want to be everything. So people who are younger like that multicultural designation.
Wow. And I would think in today's world, even with the transgender conversation.
That's,
I
and
mean,
well, this is what Rachel Dolezal has brought up, because genetically she is European, and she's just written a book that calls herself transracial.
Yes.
So even though she is genetically white, she says that she is culturally and emotionally Black.
amazing. So how have you changed since you began this project?
I know who wants to comment first.
Yeah, you can. Anita, you want to comment
Okay.
first?
I would say that I was surprised how much European background I had as an African American. It was 25 to 28%, something like that. That surprised me. And as I said, it really struck me that that's the African American story, that combination of European and African ancestry is really what has defined America, in good and bad ways, because some of that is my slavery ancestry, but we also had people in our family who were white who weren't slave owners, and my own husband is white. So I felt like that was a bit of the American story, and I guess it also gives me a respect for just survival, human survival. Think about the chances of any of us surviving from the beginning of time until now. And the story I tell is, you ever run across the street and like a car almost hits you and you think, gee, that was close? How many thousands of generations, had he's like, oh my God, a bear, and had to survive in order for us to get here. And I think that it makes me really honor the complexity of human survival. And it makes me really feel more connected to other people. When I look at my own background, I'm connected to a lot of people I did not think. I have Asian in my background. I have Native American. Yeah, so that's like that's we found 1% African in one of them. We have done several tests on Bessie. One had 1% African. We're like, yes. So yes, it definitely makes you feel more connected to people.
Wow. And what about you, Bessie?
Well, I've always thought of myself as 100% Chinese. That was my family narrative. In fact, my family, I'm not sure if most people know this, but among the Chinese, there is a term called pure race. Back in the past, when we thought that we were the middle of the earth, we called ourselves Middle Kingdom, or China did. There was a lot of pride in saying that you were pure Chinese. And so that's kind of part of my family narrative. We were told that there was never any intermarriages with other races up until my generation. And so when I got my results, I had some African, I had a big chunk of Central Asian, Afghanistan, and then I had some Polynesian, and then I immediately went back to the stories of my dad, who used to travel a lot, and he said, every time I go to Russia, they think I'm Russian, and so that sort of really expanded my idea of who I was, from just this one race to, hey, I actually share a lot of things with other people, and then it made me think about, I wonder if I can find out what some of those stories are, because not only do you find yourself sharing things with people around you, you start thinking about the generations who came before you, and how all those thousands of years of stories are now part of your own story.
And that pride we have all had in purity, whether it's African American or Jewish or Asian, like we've had this sense of pride in that. So what happens if we blow that up? that maybe we can have pride in something else that
Right.
joins us.
Right. So what people have been doing is they've been taking pride in that one racial category that they thought they had, but really they should going back to the 99.9%, we should take pride in our humanity, that we are all the same.
And what happens if we open up the options of moving forward as, that everybody should be able to develop everything about themselves, and not as if there's some groups who are more deserving than others,
Right.
but rather that we're all pretty incredible.
I know that. And so that's okay. So I have two questions on the chat, and then I want to get to what you just said. So Chris has two good questions, and she wanted to know, first of all, she's also saying how wonderful it is, that how well the two of you get along, and it's so lovely to see that. And is that, I want to know,
Thank
is
you. We get along great.
Did you always get along great, or did you get along great when you realized how connected you were?
Well, I tell Bessie she's such a collectivist. Like Bessie's like, let's do stuff together. I said, you're so from such a collectivist culture, but honestly, I never would have thought. I grew up in a pretty integrated background, but I didn't know anybody who was Chinese before, and I don't know if you had friends, anybody who's African American, but I think that we both, because we're both in interracial marriages, actually valued difference, and so I think we found that in each other. And as I said, I really have enjoyed. Bessie and I are completely different. We're totally yin and yang, and that has been really fun.
Well, so what you just said. So I'm wondering, can you, when you understand the makeup of this DNA and the percentage, do you start to see that in somebody else?
I'm not sure if I start to see that in somebody else, but I do get the sense that I am connected to that person, that I share something with that person, and that makes me want to be that person's friend more than if I took the perspective of, well, you're really different from me, I don't share anything with you.
And you find out some surprising things. For example, I didn't realize how many people from the Caribbean who have very dark skin, you think of as Black people, have Asian ancestry. And that's a whole history of the Caribbean. And it started out with one gentleman coming to the office, again, very dark brown skin. He said, my grandfather's Indian. People don't believe me. I want you to test me. And indeed, and just another woman whose one parent is from Africa, one's from the Caribbean, significant amount of Asian in her background. And she showed us the picture of her grandfather, who is, I forget, he's Asian, I forget what category. And so you can't always look at somebody and know what's going on with them, not just genetically, but culturally. So this person wasn't allowed to be culturally Asian because their skin happens to be dark brown, even though their culture is from their grandfather, who happens to be Indian. And so I see this as opening up permission for people to own something in their background that you don't always see in their face.
You know,
but here's the thing.
Go
Here's
ahead.
What happens. I've been observing what people do when they open their results, right? And the first thing that you see, for example, in a class is Anita opens her results and I open my results. And the first thing people do is, do you have this? Do you have this? Yes. And they start smiling at each other.
That's true.
All of a sudden, they're friendlier with each other. And that's really the goal, right? You want people to start becoming more understanding and more accepting of everybody.
Yeah, and it's funny, the president, he opened his and I did mine, and I said, do you have any African in yours? He goes, no. And I said, well, I forget what his background was, and I didn't have it. And he said, I have some Jewish. I said, so do I. We're like, whack.
Well, I have always known for many, 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 many years that it was our stories that shared our humanity. You know, it when you unravel the stories, you can hear somebody's fear, you can hear the thises, you can hear the that's, you can hear the sameness, you can hear the whatever. So this is just taking this to another level, you know, and I don't even have. I mean, I am so excited by what you're doing. This is like one of the things that I would follow for the rest of my life, what you're doing.
Oh, it's been great.
Yeah, I mean, I will want to follow you for the rest of. No, really,
well,
seriously.
We're just getting started.
I know, but I maybe because I think, you know, you have to somehow. You are the inventor of the questions. based on
Right.
your information that you're receiving and that you're hearing, because that's what you're doing, and you're hearing the next question to ask, which is
Sure.
building this thing of, you got the first, and I heard what you were doing the first layer, and then now it's morphing into all these other areas.
Yes. And it's endless. I mean, we just like we create these artificial lines between race, we also create them between science and art, and and so this kind of brings all these
Yeah.
things back together really on a very personal level.
Yeah.
And
One of the next approaches that we want to look at, aside from the twins that we had talked about, was we want to look at health information seeking behavior based on one's knowledge of their DNA profile. Because there are a lot of, as everybody knows, there's a lot of conditions that are linked to particular ethnicities. And so we sort of want to find out what would people do with that information.
right. Well, I do a talk a lot of times about the invisible lines of connection that exist, and this is it.
Sure.
This
sure.
is not what I thought it was.
Yeah.
But this
Well-
is what it is.
Yeah, and well, nothing's more fundamental than our DNA, Nothing is more fundamental than that.
So here's a couple of questions, and then we'll. So Chris asked you about the haplogroup, but she wants to know where she can find that information and what her group is.
Well, National Geographic, over the years, we've used about 1 million different tests, and National Geographic gives the information on haplogroups. They used to only give that information, and my students, frankly, didn't particularly like that, didn't like that way that the results were presented. But now it's my understanding that National Geographic gives the pie chart with the autosomal information plus the haplogroup. So each company has its own thing. As I said, 23, I think Bessie actually said 23andMe gives the health stuff on top of it. Now we use Ancestry.com because we feel that their website is really helpful about the science. And also we really like the way that they represent the results. And they have a new thing called genetic communities that we've enjoyed. So each company is going to have its own kind of thing that it does.
And so the next question I have is, what has been the most unexpected outcome that you have seen from this project?
Well, for me, and you can jump in, for me, I thought, when I first started, I thought just African American people were going to be interested because of the history of slavery and the gaps in our background. And when I first got that grant to write for 3 kits, I put in the grant a line to advertise so I could get 3 people to participate. And I have never had to use the line for advertising because everybody's interested in it. Number one, I'm not, African Americans are not the only people with gaps in their background. People have come here from other places and been displaced, people who are adopted. And also just people have all kinds of secrets. And those older generation, I think the younger generation has fewer of them. But just think about all the secrecy around adoption, all the secrecy around ethnicity, all of that. And so I was surprised how many people just found it interesting. And we just recently received a grant to buy 150 kits to share on campus. So we were figuring, well, we'll put out a call. If we get 200 requests, then we'll just go to the president and beg and see if we can get 50 more. Well, 1,200 people applied for kits. And so it's just amazing how...
It's really amazing because 1,200 people filled out the pre-survey, and you know how difficult it is to get people to fill out anything, any survey. But they took the time to fill out the pre-survey.
The complete pre-survey just to be considered to be part of it.
I really do. I believe, I've always believed in hope and in the future, always. Mm-hmm. And I do believe people want to feel connected.
Yes.
They want to feel that they belong.
Yes, because what's the alternative? Just to give in. And, I've often felt like, I'm sort of, Susie Cream Cheese on this, but I did a project with a group of people. It was supported by the anti-defamation group at a community college. And there was a gentleman who was a Holocaust survivor who, when he did his profile, found much more. He was Eastern European and found Asian in his background, significant amount. And he says, maybe this is the end of race. And I thought, you know what? If this man, given what he has survived, can be hopeful in that way, how can the rest of us not try? And people talk about in these times or whatever, but the times are always challenging, for one reason or another. And so the only alternative is to try to do better.
So one of the questions that I had when I was watching the videos, and this could be crazy, is once you unlock some of this, do you think it will unlock memories or anything from like a past life or reincarnation or anything like that?
I don't you can jump in. You want to answer first, because I don't know about past lives, but I know that there was one young woman who looked at her profile and she said, this is not my dad's profile. And I said, yeah, people's profiles are, and she went back and confronted her dad, and as it turned out, she was indeed not biologically related to him. And what also turned out was that everybody else in the family knew it. So when you talk about unlocking memories, I do believe that somewhere in her brain, she suspected that before she looked at the DNA. And the DNA gave her permission to ask a question that she'd always had. So in that regard, I don't really know anything about.
Well, how long does your DNA is your DNA, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, so like I've sat with people who think that they know somebody, but they've never met them.
That I wouldn't.
That's very spiritual. I don't know that I can speak much to that level of understanding or connection between people. But what do you see though? I mean, when people talk about that, do they feel like they have experiences that they share with the person?
Do. They feel like they've been together before, that they're connected. I had a guy. This is interesting. So I went to a networking an event that a colleague of mine did. And this was just last week, and she is from the South somewhere, and she married a Latino, which is interesting because I know what you were saying before on one of your things about the makeup of Latinos, because that struck me. So maybe you can. And I walked in, and all he could do was hug me. And I asked him, and his wife said, this is so unusual. They just got married. I've never met him. She said, he doesn't do that with anybody. And he said, I feel this connection with you. And I didn't hardly say anything but walk in the room. And he couldn't stop hugging me like I was his lost child or somebody. And
You give off very positive vibes.
Yeah, but nobody else is walking around hugging me like that. But I was just, but talking about this, and I just wonder, so that's nothing you've gone into before. Okay. So maybe one day it will. Or,
Question to ask.
Right. Well,
huh?
Sure.
Say that again.
That's a good one.
We'll have to ask a question about that in our survey.
I just find it interesting that how that can be with someone, and how, what are there limitations?
Well, there are no limitations to the human spirit, that's for sure.
Exactly. Good answer. Okay, so now talk about the Latino thing.
You want to comment on?
Okay. No, it's not a race.
Yeah. And again, we've used different labs, large labs, small labs, and there was one lab that would give us a Latino designation, but Latino is not an ethnic or geographic designation. It's a culture. And so what this particular lab was doing is putting together certain factors and calling that Latino. But there are people from every background who identify with that. And what's more, we found in some of our research that Latino women who were, white women who were married to Latino men over time would start to think of themselves as Latina, especially if they spoke Spanish and they had children, because they figured, I've become part of this
Yeah,
culture.
it's the cultural experience which makes a big part of make up a big part of how people identify. We had this student who was adopted from China.
That's right.
Who was adopted by a German family, and over time she just started identifying as German. But getting her DNA would allow her again to own that part of herself that she never really experienced growing up, which is the Chinese heritage.
Right. And do you also find do you find that with this kind of genetic information that are you doing anything with connecting it to like the way somebody is living some part of their life based on what they didn't think in other words, I mean, they have a propensity for eating certain food or anything like that?
Yeah, well, there's the one young woman, again, who wanted to get tested because she thought that her background might be Jewish. Nobody in her family talked about that, but she said they would use certain Yiddish expressions, they ate certain foods, and she said whenever she brought it up, they'd say, "You're an American, why are you obsessing on this?" Now, what she was picking up, and in the early tests, you could not get the same information, so we weren't able. I want to test her again to confirm it, but she believed that that was something in her background that she was trying to reclaim. And so in many cases, if somebody has that Asian background, even though they're, the dark brown skin, that they may have cultural elements that have carried over, even though they're not allowed to now call themselves a particular thing. So that happens in the opposite direction. If my friend found who's African American had Irish in her background, she emails me, she says, "Top of the morning to you." So so suddenly she feels like she can now own her Irishness.
Or our Jewish friend who got 1% Irish, or a Jewish friend that had 1% Irish, and on St. Patrick's Day on Facebook posts, "I can start celebrating St. Patrick's Day because he's got 1% Irish."
Right. So people go in all directions with this. Now the question is, if you think you have something and you have none of that, would you feel that you'd lost the right to have that? But that, I don't think we've ever had that happen yet.
Are we getting a call? I think we might be getting a call. So whoever's calling, hold on. But here's a quote also I want to read to you, which is great. And Chris just posted on the chat. Hello, somebody there? No. Okay. If you want to call in, please feel free. 919-518-9773 or computers 2K voice. And if you do call in and I don't get to say something to you immediately, just hold on because we might be in the middle of a thought. So here's a quote that Chris put on here. She wanted to know what you thought. So it's a quote by Spencer Wells. "If you go far enough back, your genome connects you with bacteria, butterflies, and barracuda, the great chain of being linked together through DNA."
Yeah. Your relatives are fish.
Could be, right?
Well, what percent do we share with monkeys and apes? Is it something like 90%?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Reptilians.
That's the whole idea of,
Of life.
Yeah, there you go. And we're all made up of DNA.
Okay. So going forward now, this 99% and where you want to put a lot of your focus, what is your hope and your dream?
My hope is that people will feel that they're connected to other people and so honor them rather than to, try to figure out who's better than whom. And to understand that we have something to learn from the survival of everybody. And I see this as a real educational experience. So I see us as having the opportunity to really learn something about humanity. And my goal is for everybody to live the best life they possibly can.
And part of that involves how we behave toward each other, right? Like we said, we've spent so much, or there has been so much horrible behavior in the world historically based on that 0.1% difference. And if we shift the focus from what is different to what is the same, I do think people are going to start treating each other in better ways.
Yeah, this is, to me, this is the tip of the iceberg. I think it is an amazing project. I highly thank you
Mhm.
for seeing this and for
Yeah.
and for holding it the way you are, because it is. I mean, you have to have fun with it.
Oh,
We do.
absolutely. When one reporter came to the class the day after the election, and there was a lot of animus around campus, I said to her, what was your experience of the class? And she said, I was surprised to see how much laughter and joy there was. And so here we were in a classroom talking about race. How often have your conversations about race been joyful? So,
Yeah, it's fabulous. And then I guess, just going back to some of the studies and seeing where people are, at one day, and then what's it like for them a year or two later or 5 years later down the road, to see what they've done with that information, how that's impacted their lives. But I do think that what you're doing
it,
is,
that is definitely a study.
yeah,
Another
it's,
question to ask.
yeah. Well, I'm sorry, what'd you say, Bessie?
Another question to ask.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So,
5, 10 years.
say what? I'm sorry, say that again.
5, 10 years down, how
Yeah.
has that changed it? And how is it changing society? Because the last article we published was called Shifting Wind, this idea that you change one little thing and, it changes the world.
Yeah, because
Right.
people start talking to their families, to their children about it, and then it opens up the conversation, and people do get more accepting over time. So how would that impact the way their children talk about race?
Right. How people are connecting. It's fabulous. Okay, so hello, we have a caller, right? Chris, you on?
Yes. Hello. Hi, Dr. Lawton. Hi, Dr. Foeman. It's Chris Reinhart. I did have a question for you. We went ahead and did the 23andMe, and I was wondering, what is the interest in people finding out about their Neanderthal background?
Yeah, and that was National Geographic was doing that as well. Does 23andMe tell you that Neanderthal as well?
Yeah, they do. They do.
Yeah. And apparently that was that happened within Europe after people migrated out of Africa, but they actually found that there are other sort of Homo sapiens who had some interaction with humans. I guess humans are pretty friendly to anybody. So I guess that's the primitive in everybody.
Well, let me ask you this. Were you looking for that in your information, and how did you react when you found your information or learned about your information?
Well, actually, since I have two experts, I wasn't sure how to interpret it. It wasn't the primary reason why we did it, obviously, but I was just wondering. It says Neanderthal ancestry, and then it says fewer Neanderthal variants than 71% of customers. So does that mean that I have a lot of Neanderthal?
No. They think that was very early. I mean, obviously, because Neanderthals weren't around for very long. That humans beat out the Neanderthals, but a couple of them,
It's okay.
got into the gene pool.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm sure it makes, no difference.
No, I just know, it seems like a pretty popular thing for people to want to know more about a couple of years ago. So it was just, as I was looking through our report, I thought, oh, goodness, they included that. So
and what was your reaction? Bessie sort of asked that, but was your reaction like, oh my God?
Oh, my reaction? Well, it was, I don't know, it didn't surprise me. It wasn't the reason why we did it. So it was just extra information. They gave us lots and lots of information on this report, like how likely are you to be a deep sleeper? How likely are you to exhibit like an alcohol flush reaction?
Caffeine addiction.
So, I mean, all kinds of information. So we got answers to what we needed, but we got, like I said, a ton of other information, and the Neanderthal piece was part of that.
What did you think about those that other kind of information? Did you find it helpful, or was it a little bit
Scary?
Yeah, to sit in your living room and have somebody give you that data?
It was. I think it was okay because we knew it corroborated what we thought. So it wasn't a surprise. Anything in there really didn't come out to be a big surprise. However, I think if you weren't expecting something to come up, like they look at a lot of different diseases and your likelihood to have one of these diseases. I think if you weren't prepared for something to pop up, it could really send you into quite a tailspin. So I think if you're going to do something like this, you need to know what the results could mean and be ready to debrief with somebody over all of these different domains of information that are coming back to you.
And I think that was partly why they were stopped from releasing that information for a while, but now they're allowed to do that.
Yeah, but it's a lot, and part of the literature that we've looked at is the literature on genetic counseling, because initially I thought, what is finding out your ethnicity going to mean? But that's powerful information, not as powerful as finding out that you have BRCA1 or you're a carrier for cystic fibrosis or something like that. But it's a big deal to have somebody give you that information and then just mail it to you and send you, and now you're off on your own. So.
Exactly. Yes, exactly.
Very interesting.
So thank you very much for answering my question.
Thank you. Thanks for calling in.
Thanks, Chris.
All right. I'm going to let the phone lines open for others who want to call in.
All right. Thanks, honey.
Thanks. Bye.
So you have a book that you're marketing now? Is there anything that our audience can help you with, do, accomplish, share, what?
Well, we're working on a book and a handbook that's coming along, part of our process. But no, people should take a look at the website, and and we will be doing more things in the fall, and we hope people will be seeing more about the work that we're doing that's out there. So we appreciate any interest that comes our way.
And when you say you're doing more in the fall, what is that?
We're not going to get into too much of where we're going, but just some of the ways that people can use this in like groups and work together to help them connect with other people. Because what we have found is that people want to do more than just take the test. They want to be part of a conversation. They want to be part of something. And so our goal is to help facilitate that process and see how it can be useful in a variety of settings. So that's where we hope to go with it.
So as academics, our primary interest is really the conversations around diversity. But I think we're seeing that a lot of private and public organizations and companies are also interested in beginning these types of conversations with members of their group.
Yeah. It's interesting because, I guess when you're talking about, when I do team things, I don't talk about them in terms of team building, because who wants to think that there's something broken, right? I talk about team enhancing or working the culture and creating, community and stuff like that. Yeah. So I think this is so interesting because really it's like that first layer to lay in to help from that place to go then to do some really great work together, to collaborate when you already know that you're connected, you don't have to fight that stuff.
Right, because one of the things that we say over and over again is that we think some of the difficult and negative conversations about race need to take place. They're not going to go anyplace. They need to occur. But we also think what has not been attended to are some of the positive conversations. And we believe that if we have a positive basis, some of the more difficult conversations least can have the context of our caring about one another and giving a damn.
No question. I've done the talking stick things. You know what a talking stick is, right?
Sure,
so I've done them many times with different groups, with groups that are in conflict. And I always find that when the group makes their stick, they put their own little thing on there, and then they describe what they put on there. Everybody's stories could be different, but it leads to the same place. And from that same place, they can talk about anything.
Yes.
Any kind of difficult conversation can be chatted about when they've already laid in some kind of similarity in emotion.
That's right.
The Heineken ad.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with the Heineken ad that came
Say
out?
that again. Say that
The
again.
Heineken. I don't want to plug a beer and alcohol.
No, go ahead. Plug anything.
It's the Heineken beer ad. You know how Pepsi got this flack for the ad on what was her name?
With the Kardashians.
One of the Kardashians. But then Heineken came out maybe a week after, and started creating an ad where people start working together on something, but they're totally different in terms of their politics or their sexual orientation, and how it built community just by having them do it.
And then when they find out the difference, they still want to talk to each other.
They want to share a beer.
Right.
Yeah, because I mean, and then it doesn't make the difference so scary.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
That we're sharing the DNA together.
Yeah, I mean, and that's really like sharing a drink.
There you
Right.
go.
So
yes, especially since it's based on a spit sample.
Right.
yeah, it's amazing, isn't it, what a little spit will do?
You're right.
And Amnon brought out, we did a stick along with a whole group a long time ago.
Yes.
And
the
I mean, this
talking
is the kind of stuff, and when you put things on and people share, they really, they open up and they feel connected.
That's neat.
It is. It's fabulous. I passed the stick to you.
You're right, there you go.
Debbie just asked a question on the chat, and she said, does your work, she said she's been back and forth on listening to the show. She said, does your work break stereotypes?
I think so. I mean,
It certainly makes people think about their stereotypes. If you find something that you may feel prejudiced, a person that you're prejudiced against, and you find that piece of information in your own DNA, everybody has to go through some meditation, some way of understanding and processing that information, right? And so it may not totally just break it right away by finding out one profile, but it certainly makes people think about it or rethink their stereotypes. And I think when we talk about it's a process, that's the beginning of the process.
Yeah. And it certainly tells people they don't have to stay in their lane,
Right. Because there isn't one lane.
Correct.
Yeah, really. I mean, and Debbie's also saying here, lifestyle, nutrition, exercise, family, communication, emotions can all heal and lessen effects of healing. Trauma will trigger the DNA changes. Debbie is a homeopath.
Okay.
So what do you think about trauma triggering the DNA changes?
Well, environmental. Now, see, we're not.
I don't know if that's scientifically. I can't speak to that, but scientifically, I don't know that it would change your genetic DNA.
Well, wouldn't environmental factors? I mean, there are things in the environment that certainly
would change your
like
racial profile.
I don't know about that.
Yeah, that's my question.
Right.
I mean, it could change certain other DNA traits, like
cancer.
Right.
Yes.
But I don't know about the genetic profile.
Well, she's saying DNA is not your fate.
Yeah, that's for sure. And I don't know. I will not be able to pronounce his name, but the book, The Gene, is really wonderful. And I just heard the author talking about. I mean, he's a poet, a prize-winning author, and said that the study of the gene and all of this really is a call for really respecting our humanity and a call for, he said, radical equality, because our genetics are pretty amazing just across the board. Yeah. So I certainly there are things that can happen to somebody based on disease, et cetera, that change someone's gene structure, but I don't know that would change their racial profile.
But the results we're getting is showing that people do not see this as their fate. If they get something in their profile that says they're, Asian or African, they don't see that as the be all and end all. There's a lot of other factors that flow into or influence how they identify. And sometimes people say, I think the lab made a mistake. They reject the DNA profile altogether.
Well, of course. And you can't change. It's not about changing people's minds or whatever. This is real. I think this is fabulous. And I think, let's say I found something out about myself, I'm like there's some ancestor from China. I mean, people have always said my eyes were slanty.
Well, Eastern European, if that's in your background, you go far enough east and you're in Asia.
Yeah. So I think, I watched the movie Lion. I don't know if you had the pleasure of watching. It's a great movie about this Indian young boy who ends up being adopted and leaves India and can't even remember the name of his.
Yes.
But when he finally finds out where he's from, he felt like he was home. And I think that is huge in what the work that you're doing is that piece of home. or an extension of making us bigger.
That's
know,
right.
Yes.
Just
Home
making
is
us bigger, yes,
it's
and
home.
having us connect. I think is really is fascinating. So, anything in closing that you would like to share with our audience? Because we have like a minute left. So,
I would just say this work has been really exciting and inclusive, and it's really been an honor and a pleasure to be involved in it.
well, I appreciate you bringing this, here, and I've loved the conversation, and the two of you are fabulous. So, I really appreciate it. What about you, Bessie?
I'm just so happy to be working with Anita on this
And
project. I
vice
mean, I
versa.
never would have thought that I would be participating in such a positive way to talk about race.
Absolutely. So thank you both so much for what you're doing, and thank you all of you out there for listening and for being here and for just your curiosity. That's wonderful. So thank you all, and we'll see you soon. And thank you, ladies.
Thank you for
Yay!
having
Right.
us.
Thank you.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. If you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section on nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by Atomos.com, makers of quality video recorders and converters, CarolinaApparel.com, and DeltaForce.net.